Sorry, it's just taking a minute.
Okay,
Because
I
I'm
think we're
still looking
live.
at.
So, welcome everyone to the first design lecture of the third cycle of the MDDI program. We're excited to kick off this series. So we're also live streaming this session today for our network. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Kate Armstrong. Kate did her master's in arts and science at Utrecht University here in the Netherlands. She's currently the CEO at Fab City Foundation and managing director at Interspecies Internet. Um, she's also a faculty member at Ajax Master of Design for Emergent Futures. But before all that, Kate managed the distributed design platform for over 3 years. And that's why today she will be sharing her expertise in distributed design. So please join me in welcoming Kate Armstrong. Kate, go for it.
Hi, everyone. I have this really great bio, and yet I can't work out how to share my screen. I feel like this might be my first hurdle. Let me see if I can do this for you to get my presentation. So it says screen sharing is paused. Share this one. Share. Why it's paused? Does anybody know where it might be paused? Resume. No. Um, all right, talk amongst yourselves. Let me try and work this out.
Is it on Canva or is it on PDF?
No, just on Google, but I think
Oh,
what I might do is do ex- exit full screen or do this and try and do it now. Mhm. 90. Do you see it now? No, every time I try to
Yes,
make it big.
perfect.
You see it?
But it's loading.
for
Oh,
for
it's
me
loading
it's
something.
loading. Yeah.
Loading,
You see
yes.
it?
Yeah, it just says loading.
Screen sharing is paused. Why?
Because we could see the presentation before you put it on presenter mode, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm just going to do it off presenter mode though, and then, sorry everyone, it's going to look a bit dodgy. Right, I'll take, it doesn't let me share it in presenter mode, so we will do our last ditch attempt by putting it into Google and slideshow. Let's try. Okay. This might work-ish.
Oh, we can even see you in the screen.
Oh, this is weird.
That's really
Do we
cool.
want this? Do we like this?
Yes, I love it.
Are we about this? Okay, great.
great.
Thanks, Lars. Okay. Don't know how I did that. And I don't. Oh, yeah. Okay, we're working with this. Okay.
Like a movie in real time.
Exactly.
This is cute. I'm like in the, what am I pointing to? Okay, stop. All right. So I'm Kate. And apart from teaching you how to do wonderful tech kind of exciting things in Zoom, as Dan already introduced, I am currently the CEO of Fab City Foundation. I'm the executive director of Interspecies Internet and Distributed Design Strategic Advisor. So this is kind of my why I'm here today to talk to you about this topic. And you'll see that I touch on most of these topics. I'm based in Indonesia, but I'm Australian, and actually I'm currently in Australia, which is exciting and quite late, which apologies if I don't get things organized like the tech. This is our amazing team. You can see some friendly faces that maybe you recognize over here. This is the Fab City Foundation team. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about distributed design. I'm going to run through a general overview of how we look at distributed design in the context of traditional design paradigm. We're going to look at what kind of makes it, let's say, special or different, some examples, how you might want to get involved. And then I want to take a little bit of a left-hand turn, and we're going to talk a little bit about what distributed design does when we think beyond the human. So let's start with what is distributed design. And we're going to start by kind of breaking apart a kind of well-known product that we all know. We all know this product, which is the humble sneaker. Most of us wear it. And what we probably also know is that the way in which this humble product that we kind of wear every day, we probably have about 5 different pairs if we're a regular kind of everyday consumer that we use, and then we get rid of and we get the next one. What we also kind of know about this product, and I think most of you, if you're coming from a design background, have an understanding of this, is that there are multiple materials, multiple processes, multiple ways in which this product is actually an example of how extractive and manipulative our current design paradigm and production paradigm is. So the humble sneaker has material from various locations across the world that are shipped to a single location to construct this sneaker. We then know that it's then shipped from X location to the location which we purchase it. We then take that purchase home. Maybe that's by online shopping, or we go to the store in our car and we buy that. And what we know pretty well is that the impact of all of this really becomes quite hectic, right? So we not only have the movement of goods across the world, we have the movement of raw materials across the world, we then have the impact of creating a shoe, which is an economic impact. The cost of the shoe is not in any way equal, nor corroborates the cost of the manufacture to the cost of the product itself, where you're actually purchasing it. So this, for example, is a great map that shows the percentage of people who work on the shoe versus the percentage of people who purchase the shoe. This is, quite impactful when we look at also how this very humble product is really representing what is wrong with the way in which we consume. Not only this, but the product itself contributes to a homogenization of design culture globally. So we purchase the same product. I could purchase the same product here in Australia as I can in Uruguay, I think we said that you are in, Roberto. So, or in the Netherlands, where Dan is, for example. We could literally go out and purchase the exact same product, which contributes to this kind of falsification of individuality through the unique branding that happens across the stores of one product, which in this case is Nike, that in actual fact, we're purchasing the same product and we're purchasing into the same market of products. We also know that this contributes to a lot of inequalities globally, and we also know that this contributes to a lot of waste globally. I don't need to tell you most of what I've just told you for you to understand the fact that this is a paradigm that in this course we want to change, and we want to understand how we can change that. So in distributed design in particular, what we're looking at is how we can reduce this ecological footprint, this movement of goods around the world, the access to, the raw materials coming from one side of the world and being compiled in another. The democratizing the access to quality design, so how we can actually have the production and sales of a good in the same local economy. How we can access quality design, expand markets for designers, so not that global homogenization of a design, but actually have access to local markets, local ingenuity, local design, and increase that for designers, makers, and manufacturers. So how can the entire product system that we know, thanks to globalization and thanks to global supply chains, how can we actually look at our skills that we have locally, our work, our resources that we have locally? How can we change this paradigm towards something else? And I'm sure you've already started talking about this concept, which is one that you'll come back to multiple times, which is the concept of what I talked about first, which is this idea of the extractive economy, one in which product goes in and trash comes out. The distribution of raw materials is a global distribution channel. The transportation of product is global. The production of product is usually centered in the less economically wealthy centers. And the consumption of that product is usually in the more wealthy areas of the world. So we're looking at here something that is extractive. It's a product in, trash out model, which we call in Fab City PITO. What we're looking at in the ability to change this is actually shifting this to an economy that looks more like the one on the right, which is data in, data out. So what if we rethought about how these impacts are currently being generated and created different systems for them? So what if we exchanged data, so moving information, and locally circulated the raw goods and the infrastructure to be able to create and manufacture, design, manufacture, and create locally? So this is what we call the DIDO, data in, data out. So this global context and this this framework, which you will see many times in this course, is the PITO to DIDO. So this is the general overarching mission of the Fab City agenda, the Fab City Global Initiative. And this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about distributed design. How do we go from that sneaker being a product that represents global inequality, global waste paradigms, unsustainable materiality, to something that could be beneficial to actually develop circular economy locally and a knowledge exchange on a global scale? So how we do this in Fab City, and I think you may have already started looking at this, or you will look at this in studio very, very soon, is we do this on multiple layers through a framework. So the one we're going to really focus on today is this idea of incubating projects. So how do we actually use local development, local manufacturing capacity to build products that have a reason to live in their local context? And how do we then share that globally across an international scale? So the bottom layer of this framework that we use in the Fab City Global Initiative and is stewarded by the Fab City Foundation, this is the Fab City full stack. The bottom layer on the very, very bottom is what we call a Fab Lab. So this is the infrastructure, the capacity to make certain digital fabrication processes. So have you yet talked about what a Fab Lab is, and is everybody aware what this is? Do I need to do a 101 to get you up to speed? We have not talked about it, Dan?
Oh, yeah, we did. I think most of them know.
Perfect. So this is great news. So with your knowledge of what a Fab Lab is, you have a knowledge that there is also some 2,800 of these globally, right? And here it says 1,800. That is out of date. Now there's 2,800, so almost 2,000 more across the world, which create a syndicated production facility across the world, right? And we know also that the Fab Lab doesn't act alone in a city. There are multiple manufacturing capacities in a city. So so these are things in a Fab Lab. So what distributed design does is it looks at this ability to have local manufacturing and global connectivity to move data instead of product, and uses this to rethink how goods might be produced, from which materials, and it also enhances the consumer's relationship with their products. So instead of us going to the store and buying a pair of sneakers, it says, okay, how else could that sneaker exist within our lives, within our production capacity, and within a local yet globally connected context? So when we're talking about distributed design, what we're talking about is actually doing exactly what it says on the packet. Taking design, opening it, and distributing it. And by doing that, you're not only distributing this, which is the capacity to actually make the goods, and you can make those goods, for example, in a fab lab, but also the actual agency of the individual to make. So you can think of it like baking. Using a recipe, we can make a cake locally, and we can directly, in our kitchens, do that work. So the kitchen is the fab lab, let's say. Whatever we're designing in our own kitchen or making within our own kitchen, we can share that recipe to Uruguay, Netherlands, Barcelona, wherever else, and you can make the same cake. But what will differ between the cakes is the local context, the ingredients, the actual quality, let's say, of the ingredients, or the type of chocolate maybe you use, or maybe Roberto wants to put some mate into his recipe that it wasn't called for, but he's going to spice it up and change it. So what distributed design does is it says, here's a design, and now if you have access to a fab lab and have access to manufacturing facility locally, you can make it with your own spin on it. So what does this mean for design? And the way that I've kind of done this comes from the distributed design platform. So we can go through this as kind of 4 aspects of the design process that change when we look at distributed manufacturing capacity and the design process. So what changes is the fact that what we have is something that becomes very highly ecosystemic. So instead of having one product that's owned by one individual producer, we have a platformed approach in which different parties may be part of developing one product. So I may develop the wheels and upload those and share those locally to a car design, for example, and somebody else might be able to design the rest of this design. This happens through design within the network and within distributed design being open. So distributed design advocates for open source licenses, free and available documentation, and a standardization process for easy replication. So this means that designs are not held within trademarks or held within the other word, sorry, I've just forgotten this word, patents, but they're actually enabled to be shared and explored globally. The design process with distributed design also allows for a collaborative approach to design. So multiple people can be involved in a design process instead of having a closed process where a design moves from, for example, through a very closed and non-transparent design chain. We have the ability to bounce ideas through shared authorship, through collectives of designers, and through Skillshare and knowledge transfer. This can allow for people to be involved in the hyper-customization of products and also in being involved in part of the process as a prosumer, so actually being actively involved in the design of their products. And finally, we have this really beneficial aspect to this, which is that the designs can be adapted to be circular, for example. They are more situated and socially aware of the context in which they're in. And finally, they're also able to be thought as agents for sustainability within the environment in which they're developed. So all of this is great to kind of talk about, and we can talk about, oh, it's designed in a fab lab and has moved to another fab lab, but it's best to see how they kind of come together in some examples. So a classic example of how distributed design kind of started was OpenDesk. So OpenDesk designed an online marketplace where you could where individually designed furniture was hosted, and you could download that furniture and produce it in any fab lab. So the capacity of the fab lab was matched with the design of the furniture. So you can see that the furniture has a very specific design aesthetic, and this is so that it can be, in this case, CNC'd. So this meant that designers all over the world could have access to these designs. They could customize them, they could change them, and then produce them locally in a fab lab to be able to, for example, in this case, use in their office. Another example which comes from the distributed design platform is a project which saw parametric design be used to design and fabricate a bike for a child who couldn't access a bike that was off the rack. So this child has mobility or low mobility in I think it's, for example, in this case, access for the pedals. So the Fab Lab got together with the child's parents, and a NGO locally in Italy, and designed a bike that would work for this individual. So by using parametric design, as the individual grew, they could also increase the size of that bike so that the bike was able to grow with the child. And they then took the similar idea and could apply it for other individuals and other children who needed similar mobility access. So this in particular, La Bicicletta, shows us how the design of the bike is directly customized and hyper customized for the individual, and can be done so on in multiple iterations. So the design itself changes with the user and in collaboration with the designer, who is also the user. This example of a distributed design comes from Slovenia, and this is interesting because it is an example that uses circularity as part of the design of the project. So this project was designed to, I guess, remedy the issue that we talked about at the start around this idea of, a shoe being a humble object that has a huge global impact. So this designer decided to recreate footwear by using local traditional wickercraft. So the actual knowledge from the local region was embedded into the design. And it also uses a circular material. So this is the husk from a corn that's very readily available thanks to agricultural processes locally. So this designer was able to create a high quality product with sustainability, customization, and circularity in mind, that also created quite a contemporary and locally specific product. So when we talk about the idea of sustainability and the idea of a product being embedded in place, this one gives a really good example about how that could be done. So I wanted to give some examples of where these kinds of exchanges of information and knowledge happen online. So I wanted to give an example of how or where you might be able to go to get a bit of a feel for the kind of exchange that happens in these kinds of processes. So this is Thingiverse. It is probably the most common and well-known file sharing platform for 3D printing. There are others that have now popped up, but basically this platform exemplifies what we mean when we talk about this idea of distributed design. Somebody in one location globally has a great idea for 3D printing. creates a 3D printing design and can upload that onto the platform for anybody to download under a Creative Commons or general public license. So anybody in the world is able to then go online. They, in some cases, pay a fee to download the design. In some cases, they don't. In some cases, it is offered for a Creative Commons under a Creative Commons license, which is free. And then you can use your 3D printer to print the design. You can use whatever material you want to print that. You can make changes on that design before you print it using software. But this is basically a library for multiple designs to be shared, uploaded, remixed if you wish to, and then utilized. So this one I think gives a really good example if you're interested in kind of the basics of what a distributed design ecosystem might look like. This one gives a really good example about how that process works amongst the design community globally. This one is I think, somewhere where you can go to get some more information about the concept of distributed design itself. I think that the depth of research which has happened over the last 3 to 4 years post-COVID has really taken the concept of distributed design from something which is about sharing designs and kind of engaging in the Dido, let's say, paradigm, to something which is really about supporting makers and designers to practice in a post-capitalist design paradigm. So I think with that in mind, the distributed design platform is a really interesting place to go to see kind of the latest updates and the latest way of working, and some really great examples of design which is embracing this non-extractive, post-capitalist, really locally embedded design approach. And then finally, there's this distributed design toolkit, which I think is really interesting. It actually came from the platform, and it's some years old now, but I think it's quite interesting because what it does is it gives some really good depth to what it means as an individual designer to be able to access this paradigm of design. So it really talks about how, if we are practicing as distributed designers and we are practicing within this paradigm in which we have access to the local ecosystem, and we're not necessarily participating in a homogenized, quite impersonal design field. What does that mean for our mission? What does that mean for our identity as a designer? And how do we participate, and how do we ensure that we are participating in this domain as a designer that represents our values and represents our own kind of purpose in why we design. So I think this is a really interesting place to go if you are looking for some support in how you can access this Dido field of design. And then finally, I wanted to just end with a kind of more of a provocation of what this field of distributed design does to the wider field of design thinking. And I think you're going to touch on these topics as you go through the program, but I wanted to bring them here because I think it's really interesting that as we evolve kind of this landscape of design, we have designers increasingly adopting more collaborative and ethical and sustainable approaches to design. And this is certainly the case when we look at moving away from this extractive paradigm and moving towards something that is about distributing. When we distribute design, we also distribute various values that come with design. So it's my belief that through the distributed design paradigm, or the Dido paradigm, agency is distributed, power is distributed, approach to who designs and how we design is also distributed amongst multiple actors. And in many cases, those actors are not necessarily only human actors. And I think that this becomes a little bit more of a provocation now that we are kind of moving into an agenda in which we recognize that human is not the only intelligence in the world. So I think that we have the opportunity to use distributed design not only to engage with various stakeholders, so various communities. For example, the example that I gave with the bicycle, we can question who is the designer in that project. Is it the child who is using the bike? Is it the parents who were involved in the design process? Is it the NGO that was working with them, or is it the Fab Lab? We can start to question who becomes the designer and how does design get distributed amongst various stakeholders which become part of the design process. There are 8 billion people, more than 4,000 cultures, 185 bioregions, and more than 7,100 languages in the world. Distributed design is a method of us giving space within the design field to this. So if we move from this homogenization of culture and goods that we now have inside this kind of really extractive Peto approach to design and manufacturing, we start to open up space for these 8 billion people to be involved in design. Because why not? Because there is no benchmark. There is no gatekeeping. It is not an opaque system. It becomes transparent and accessible. And we as designers are actually part of enabling that. So it gives space for the 4,000 plus cultures to be reflected in the design products or systems or solutions that are developed. We're not all having to wear the Nike high top. Even if we want to, we don't have to. Maybe we can have the shoes, for example, the dolly shoe that I showed you, the corn dolly, maybe 4,000 cultures, 4,000 different shoes to match 4,000 different cultures. In terms of the bioregions, this also represents materiality. So the Corn Dolly project, again, is a really good representation of accessing not only local knowledge and local culture, but also local agriculture and local refuse, which comes from the natural processes that happen in that place. And in terms of this one, I mean, 7,100 plus languages. This also is about, how we can connect with different cultures at large and different languages at large, while also representing people who are in many ways of our own tongue and of our own place locally. So we can have that connection. We suddenly have an opening to facilitate design with our own community and connect globally through platforms. The one I showed you is Thingiverse, but there's many, and share our own culture with the global context. So I love this, well, it's like I don't know what it is, a graphic from Deep Design Lab. Deep Design Lab is an Australian-based lab. And I think that this one shows really specifically the approach that distributed design opens up in terms of how we understand design, and we understand the impact of distributing design. So we move from anthropocentric, which we know, which is the extractive economy, to what here they call is ecocentric, which is kind of what I was being talking about, which is this DIDO, this ability to have more than humans involved in our processes. Why? Because we're moving away from that extraction towards something that is more deeply and widely understood as part of being in a bioregion, in multiple different systems that are not only those systems that are of production and consumption on a global scale. So I really like this one. I think that it's a really interesting take on the process that we go through as distributed designers, that, it's really great that we move to anthropocentric shallow, which is kind of this nature-based solutions and the biomimicry, these kinds of solutions, which are really valid and have a place, and certainly have a place if we're talking about economic value. But as we move all the way to this deep ecocentric side, we start to see that if we really push the depth of what distributed design can do, we also move towards a more than human or interspecies space of design, where we start questioning many of the influences that are available to us and that we can open our minds, hearts, design thinking to when we start looking at a Dido context. Distributed design can, and I would suggest it encourages us to think beyond the human, because we are put into a context whereby suddenly power, agency, access, all of these things become far less formalized than they have been. And that informality gives a fragility to the systems that we've been participating in. And that fragility opens up space for various different ways of thinking as designers. So the first one I just want to talk about 4 kind of influences that we can think about beyond the human when we're talking about distributed design, and that become kind of exciting provocations for being a distributed designer. So this is my kind of little bit left field take on distributed design, but I think that it creates quite an interesting provocation. So the first one that I like to think about is the way I like to think about it, and I usually talk about it as the concept of the hyper object. So this is from a Timothy Morton book called The Ecological Thought. And basically the hyper object looks at things that are so massively distributed in time and space that they transcend spatio-temporal specificity. These are things like global warming, racism, styrofoam, radioplutonium, and in the example that I'm giving, a pandemic. So the concept of the hyperobject, I think this is so useful because it gives us the ability to see that within a distributed context, we can look beyond the human scale. We can tackle concepts that are both pervasive and potent and impact the design that we do at all scales. So I'm going to give you an example to try to concretize this. So the example is the example of a pandemic. During the pandemic, the distributed design community got really active in designing face masks. So these PPE, personal protective equipment. So what happened was, in a very viral sense, makers started realizing that the traditional pitot systems in which, we would receive these probably from China somewhere, they would be shipped across the world. Those systems weren't able to run because all of the shipping lines and all of the central systems were shut down. So using whatever material they had, designers and makers across the world started manufacturing their own using laser cutters or 3D printers, and in many cases, mainly digital fabrication equipment, which can be found in a fab lab. So designers and makers started to do this, and they were directly being influenced by the pressure and the omnipresence of the pandemic at large. So as different countries closed or moved, as the legal systems changed to create lockdowns or open lockdowns, the design of the equipment and the way in which the equipment was being used, the system that was being designed, was changing in direct relationship with that pandemic. Can we touch the pandemic? No. Can we quantify it? No. Can we actually understand it in a specific space or time? No. It's something that is a hyper object, but has a direct relationship on the design of the system and the product that was created at this time. So when we're thinking about distributed design, and when we think about design beyond the paradigm of the extractive pedo economy, there are many influences that we will have to grapple with that directly influence the way in which we respond as designers. And to ignore them won't work. But my kind of provocation to you is to think about how they can be part of the process in which you design. How can they inform the design? How can they move, change, and integrate into the process of design that you have? So the next one, which is close to my heart, because I work on many projects of this kind, and there are so many examples. And the next one is the non-human animals. So this is sometimes seen as a little bit quirky, but something that is very much coming at the human species at speed, is that humans and non-human animals have historically lived and coordinated and, you know, worked together. And what's interesting is that through different applications, sometimes technological, sometimes not, we actually are starting to be able to consider their agency when it comes to design. Because if we open design and we say, okay, design is now distributed amongst actors, we can also distribute it around non-human animals. So there are some really interesting projects happening in which we're looking at interspecies justice systems, how interfaces can actually involve animals in choices. This happens a lot in human-animal conflict studies. This is a big field in which animals are actually part of design and design systems, and they're given a voice in managing and mitigating conflicts between animals and humans. Two of the examples I've given here, one is from the SETI project. So they're actually using AI to decode, or AI large language models to help decode whale languages so that humans can be involved in processes of designing systems whereby shipping, it basically doesn't interfere with the migration habits of whales. So that actually will help to redesign different transit systems globally. And the one at the bottom is by Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, I'm pretty sure is the name. And this is about using, again, AI to, which is, so the formula that they use in this language model is inherently weighted with a bias of empathy from humans. So it basically will create the best possible outcome for the most pollinators, so that is bees, etc., to design a garden where the pollinators can have the most benefit. So if you go onto the website, it's absolutely enchanting. It's really interesting, and you can be part of actually you can actually be part of designing a garden that benefits pollinators. So this is something that kind of brings this idea of actually actively engaging animals in the design of solutions. The other one, which I think many of you might already know about, is this idea of designing with microbes and microbial life. I think you have like some specific classes that will go into this. We actually share our body with 39 trillion microbes, so it makes a lot of sense that we start kind of designing with them. We also have, of course, the ability to design DNA structures, and we can go all the way down to the atomic level. But the examples that I've given actually bring the concept of kind of the microbial world into a collaborative design space. So this is, I believe, representative of humans directly collaborating with microbes. So the one at the top right is a microbe that leaves a pigment. So humans and the microbe have collaborated to create this design piece in the top right. The bottom right is a SCOBY. So this is a kombucha SCOBY, which has been made into leather. So that's a collaboration between a SCOBY and a human, I guess. And then the bottom is the growing pavilion, which is a mycelium structure, which is quite well known for being, I think it was at Dutch Design Week in this context. So I think what is interesting here is that if we look at the hyper object, we should also look at the micro or nano level and start to recognize that if we do open up a design system to be able to kind of coordinate with multiple scales, well, we should also be actively aware of the fact that scales are those also that we can't necessarily see, and that these scales and these approaches to design sometimes create a richness that we wouldn't be able to create had we stayed in this pedo kind of space. Finally, and I don't think I used to talk about this like a few years ago, and it would be like, oh, wow, we made this with, AI tools. That's amazing. But I just don't think it has the validity anymore, because most of the design tools we use online and most of the tools we use online are have AI capacity. So I think that the main thing here is really about thinking, when we're using those tools, what is the agency of our collaborator? And is the AI a collaborator? Do machines have agency in the design process? And I think you will talk about scholars like Nadia Peak, who has been involved in designing machines to make machines as well. If we are collaborating with these machines, should we have some kind of input as to what they do and how they do it? Or is the collaboration, should the collaboration be as organic as it is, for example, collaborating with a fungi or with a whale? I think one of the interesting things in the case of AI and technology is that the acceleration of which this is impacting how we design very simple things is far beyond anything that I think we had ever really considered in terms of design. And we probably need to grapple with the idea of, are we collaborating with AI if we are designing? And is this an agent in our distributed design context? And I asked this question a little bit tongue-in-cheek and a little bit not. The two images on the right-hand side of the screen are AI-generated images. The prompt was a future city. So can you design a future city? So if we look at that and we consider our potential to collaborate with AI, then I think we need to be very specific about the relationship that we form, because I think I want the top version of the future city and not the bottom version. So yeah, how can we actually harness, explore, and stretch our understanding of AI in different applications? And I'm sure you'll talk about this throughout this course. That's all. That's all I have to discuss today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm really happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. I think I'm now back in my regular seat, so that's exciting. No longer have the cool background. Yeah, I'm really happy to answer any questions or any doubts or thoughts, if anyone has any.
Also, for those who are watching on YouTube live, you can maybe, if you have questions, put them in the chat there and I will ask them to Kate. Otherwise, for the students, just open your mics and go for it.
Thank you, Kate, for the amazing presentation. I really like the way you combine so many topics and combine them in this topic of our course, distributed design. I have a specific question about intelligence. You mentioned probably in AI, we could say it through technological perspective and also in the more than human section. I remember in the deep sector and there's a sort of like evolving stages and more towards the deep side and probably it's more intelligent. And actually, I'm wondering how would you define and how should we define intelligence? And yeah, I'm wondering, can I, for example, do a project on it?
I think you could do, I mean, I think you could do more than a project on the concept of intelligence. There's something that is
Yeah.
a highly debated topic.
Yeah, for sure.
The concept of, yeah, I mean, it's a really great question. I think it's definitely one that, if you'd like, I can also send you some bits and
Yeah.
pieces on from my work with interspecies internet. Intelligence is something that is quite, in my opinion, anthropocentric as a concept. So we tend to approach intelligence from the way we understand intelligence, and that's through both our understanding of our own intelligence and having a theory of mind in that I understand that
Yeah.
you have a different intelligence or different understanding of the world that I do. But we tend to not extend that theory of mind to animals or non-human agents. So we tend to project our own understanding of intelligence onto other beings, which means that in many cases we are not necessarily recognizing the ways in which others are intelligent and potentially in ways in which we're not intelligent. So, you know, it's a really deep and really complex question. I think definitely in the application of artificial intelligence, it becomes even more deep and complex. But there's definitely so much really interesting discourse on that topic. I think if you're interested in it, it's something that right now in particular is getting a lot of attention in terms of, artificial intelligence, and particularly in as we get closer to let's say communicating with animals, these questions are the ones that come up consistently.
Yep.
You know, what is intelligence, and what is consciousness even, and what is it to be a being that is sentient. So I think that's a super interesting and very deep, very exciting question to look into.
Yeah, I've been following interspecies networks work and lectures recently for a while. And yeah, as you mentioned, they were doing research on consciousness and probably animals' behavior, habits, and so on. And yeah, it's interesting to see it's very linked very close to natural science, biology, more scientific, a bit traditional way, I would say. And I'm very interesting to see how through our course we could define these concepts by ourselves, because for now I don't know if it's still a page to be filled up.
Yeah,
I
I
know
think
that.
I think so. I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
I really enjoyed your presentation, and I've been reflecting on what you said about how when we distribute design, we also distribute the values with it, and that we can start changing culture through that. And something that I've been thinking a lot about in my work is how do we make climate policy and the process of negotiating climate policy more participatory and inclusive, and how citizen assemblies can be a format for that. And I'm curious in your work if you've seen more formats of civic engagement that sort of fit in this distributed design process.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a saying, I can never remember sayings properly, and I know the intention of the thing. It's something like, there's not one shoe fits all, something along those lines, where I think that what's really interesting in the way that design is moving, and I think that this is about, moving away from those centralized, homogenous kind of approaches to design, is that those participation opportunities become situated and become specific to the context. So in my work, I mean, specifically around, working with the Fab City network, for example, we have 54 cities now and completely different contexts. We have islands, regions, kingdoms, countries, cities of 2,000 people. What that brings is just such diversity in terms of how people do engage, what citizen participation assembly looks like. I think that, if you're really interested in this topic, I think that's a really interesting place to look, is how it's happening in different places through that network is really good. But I think, yeah, as I said, it highlights the fact that there's no one size fits all, and every context has its own niche needs and abilities to organize or not organize, formalize or not formalize. One, I encourage you to look at the way in which bee colonies are democratic. Do you know this? Maybe you know this.
No, I just in general call it, yeah, the way that bees interact. But yes, yeah.
Yeah, have a look at this. It's definitely in, what is this book? Ways of Being, I think it's called. But you can look it up, and it's really interesting. It kind of is really that specific idea that every hive, every community, every group has a way of decision making that works for them. And it's really based on, I mean, the bee situation is really beautiful because it's based on this movement that the bees do, which is kind of talked about as a waggle, and they kind of have a way of democratically making decisions through this kind of dance, let's say waggly dance. And it just is a really nice exemplification of the fact that finding that way of making decisions or coming to consensus is something that should be built and brought out of a context. And I think you'll see what I mean when you look it up, and if not, I can send it to you. But yeah, I think that this is a really nice example of how that can work. I hope that answers. I think I was just rambling about bees.
No, I love it. Thank you. I'll look into that book. Ways of Being, you said, yeah.
Yeah, this is it. Yes, Stan.
So I think we also have a question on the comments on YouTube from Stefano from the DIME team, which was faculty of our cycle last year. So is the concept of distributed design limited in any way to designs or products that are within certain limits of technological complexity? For example, microprocessors, very complex on a nanoscale, or agricultural machines, very big. Are they outside of the reach of Fab Lab's fabrication capabilities?
There is in one of the books, so I'm going to answer this by not answering this, but in one of the books that we did with the distributed design platform, we asked for contributions from anyone who wanted to contribute. And I am missing the name right now, and I apologize, but somebody wrote us an article which was about how distributed design was used in a local election, and how the local election exemplified the concept of distributed design. So my thinking is that the concept can kind of be applied to anything as long as you have the infrastructure that is required for the application. So if you have, I don't know, a tractor, I need to read the question again, but if you have a tractor sized distributed process, then I guess you need tractor size distributed manufacturing infrastructure. If you have a democratic vote, you need the infrastructure that will do that, which is a system of governance locally that will support that, for example. So I think it's more about, maybe it's less about an operational perspective, but more about understanding how a framework can support a particular set of values or a certain provocation, I would say. I'm not going to say I hope that answered, because I know that it didn't. That would just be me being facetious.
Any more questions for Kate? No? Everything clear? Okay.
If you do have any questions, you're more than welcome to like send them my way, and I'm happy to send more unrelated animal articles your way. That's always lots to learn from natural world.
Yeah, maybe we can share your email with the students so they can reach out to
Yeah,
you
for sure.
in the future if they
For
have any
sure.
questions.
My pleasure.
Other than that, thank you very much, Kate, for this great introduction into distributed design and deep dive into distributed design, more than human distributed design. And thank you all for joining this first design lecture of this cycle of MDI.
Thanks for having me. Good luck
Thank
with the
you
rest
so
of the
much.
program.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Yeah, take care.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao, ciao.